everyone. I wanted to start off by patting each and every single one of you for joining me today. This is a huge step that you're taking by opening up this conversation. We'll be discussing stress management, tactics, and suggestions to handle and reduce stress in your life. So, I'm your host. My name is Jessica. I'm a registered social worker and I work with Jack and Jill Health. So, today's agenda is we'll be doing a bit of check in, some defining stress, coping with stress, and then a question and answer period at the end. So, this is an environment where everyone should feel heard, respected, and engaged. I really want to make sure that each and every single one of you feels engaged with, and I want to thank you for joining me virtually today. I'm here to facilitate a discussion on stress management and healthy coping strategies. I understand that attending a workshop virtually might present its own set of challenges, and it might feel awkward to share and engage in an online platform, particularly for those who are not accustomed to it. Nevertheless, I appreciate your presence and participation. Today, I want to emphasize the significance of managing stress for our overall well being. Stress is a natural part of life, but when it becomes overwhelming and unmanaged, it can have negative effects on our physical and mental health. That's why it's crucial to develop healthy coping strategies that can help us navigate through challenging times and maintain a sense of balance. Throughout this session, I will be encouraging you to actively participate by really thinking about what thoughts, any experiences that you've had, and any coping strategies that have worked well for you. Together, we can explore various techniques and resources that assist us in effectively managing stress. Remember that stress management is a continuous process, and what works for one person might not work for someone else. It is very individual. So I would say let's keep an open mind and then let's start our discussion on stress management and healthy coping strategies. So when we start thinking about stress, I think it's important to kind of think about what your definition of stress might look like. What might be some examples of stress that happen in your every single day life? Stress impacts our physical, mental, and emotional health and has an effect on our body's functioning, our thoughts and cognitive abilities, our emotional well being. And I would say that some levels of stress are natural, but it's when we are kind of leading to that chronic and unmanaged stress that it can have detrimental effects. Stress comes from all different areas: work, relationships, finance, or even major life changes. So firstly, it's important to think about our physiological response to stress. So with our physiological response to stress, that is specifically our body's response to the stress. Stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline, increased heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration. You might notice that your digestion is slowing down. You might experience muscle tension because oftentimes stress is stored in our bodies. You might feel like your shoulders are really tense at the end of the day. You might be experiencing migraines, things like that. Stress also impacts us psychologically, which impacts mood, cognition, emotions, and feeling anxious or depressed. And I think understanding these responses can help us better recognize what the signs of stress are. You might notice certain warning signs that you're heading towards that chronic and unmanaged stress. And it also helps to acknowledge the very real impact of stress on us as well, so that we can prioritize stress management and seek better coping strategies. I think oftentimes stress can even originate from talking about stress itself, and it might feel like just another task to tackle in our everyday life. But it's precisely because of the demands we face that it's essential to address this topic. Sometimes the ways in which we become accustomed to dealing with stress may not be the most optimal or healthy way of dealing with stress. And so, again, while some level of stress might provide motivation, too much of it over an extended period of time can lead to physical, mental health challenges, and emotional exhaustion overall. So there are also differences between acute and chronic stress. So acute is more so the short-term stress that occurs in response to immediate challenges and demands, and chronic is long-term stress that persists over an extended period of time. As short-term stress occurs in response to immediate challenges and demands, it might be even be termed as situational stress. Acute stress is related to our fight or flight instinct, which releases stress hormones that prepare us to deal with a perceived threat. Once this threat is resolved, oftentimes that stress goes away. Long-term stress is stress that persists over an extended period of time. It can be caused by ongoing pressures. When we experience a sustained release of stress hormones, it can have a negative impact. So I want you to kind of think about what might be some examples of acute stress in your life and what might be some examples of chronic stress in your life. Some common examples of acute stress include speaking during a meeting, having to meet a certain deadline, and chronic might look like more so relationship challenges and financial instability. And so when you start thinking about the differences between acute and chronic levels of stress, you might start realizing that there are very different approaches to managing each type of stress as well. When we examine the differences between acute levels of stress and chronic stress, it becomes evident that the approaches to managing stress will definitely vary. Understanding these distinctions can guide us in adopting appropriate strategies for effectively managing stress. So let's explore some of the differences between management strategies for acute and chronic stress. So with acute stress management, it might look like, applying those stress reduction techniques such as engaging in activities that promote relaxation and stress reduction, like deep breathing exercises, meditation, mindfulness, or even progressive muscle relaxation. There's a really good resource that I will be sending out as well that includes some progressive muscle relaxation that you can do, and it's guided. And there's really good videos on YouTube about it as well. With acute stress, it might look like time management, prioritizing tasks, setting realistic goals, and breaking them down into smaller, more manageable steps. Effective time management can also help to alleviate the pressure of impending deadlines. With acute levels of stress as well, it might look like problem solving. So assessing the situation and identifying potential solutions, breaking down the problem into smaller bite-sized steps, and focusing on addressing them systematically. You might also look like seeking social supports, seeking supports from friends, family, or even colleagues. Sharing your concerns and talking to someone you trust can provide emotional relief and different perspectives on the issue. With chronic stress management, it's something that exists over a longer period of time. So it might look like adapting those acute stress management techniques in a more regular day-to-day basis. So it looks like prioritizing self-care activities that support your overall well-being, which include regular exercise, healthy eating, adequate sleep, and engaging in hobbies or activities that bring joy and relaxation. So it might look like kind of looking at your lifestyle overall and making some of those changes to make sure that the stress is managed. It might look like adopting those stress management techniques, more regular stress reduction practices. It's kind of like what we talked about with the mindfulness, or engaging in activities that promote relaxation, self-reflection, and that can look different for everyone. It can look like setting healthy boundaries as well, learning to set boundaries and say no to excessive demands or commitments that contribute to chronic stress, prioritizing your well-being, and allocating time for rest as well. It can look like building up your social network, building up your support system of friends, families, and people that you can rely on, and seeking guidance as well. And it can also look like seeking out professional help. So talking to somebody on a more regular basis in regards to what exactly is going on. In managing both acute and chronic stress, it's crucial to engage in activities that promote self-care, adopt healthy coping mechanisms, and seek support when needed. Remember that these approaches may overlap, and it's essential to adapt them to your individual circumstances and preferences. I would say regularly reassess and adjust your strategies to be able to effectively manage your stress. So there's different types of coping strategies. There's problem solving responses versus emotional responses. And the name kind of says it all, but basically problem solving responses are more so about addressing the stressor and finding solutions. That looks like identifying the source of stress, analyzing and evaluating, generating solutions, and then implementing and monitoring. So it's more so about solving the original problem that might have been the source of stress. Emotional responses are more so to take care of that psychological response to stress. So addressing the emotional impact of stress and managing your emotional well-being. So that can look like self-awareness, better understanding yourself, what works for you, emotional regulation, self-care, and stress reduction. And it can look like positive coping strategies as well. So let's break this down a little bit more. With problem-solving responses, this might look like, again, identifying the source. So clearly identifying the specific cause or stressor that is contributing to your stress. This might be a workplace issue, a relationship conflict, or a challenging situation that you're facing. And then it looks like analyzing and evaluating. So breaking down the problem into smaller, manageable components, analyzing it, and assessing available resources and evaluating what potential solutions or actions might look like. And generating solutions. So that looks like brainstorming possible things that might solve the problem. Consider both short-term and long-term approaches that could help alleviate or eliminate the stressor. And then it's about implementing and monitoring. So select the most feasible and effective solution and then put it into action. I would say monitor the outcomes and make adjustments as needed. Oftentimes, when we're successful in managing our stress, it almost feels like a win. And when we've experienced that, it helps us to continue to be motivated to continue the changes that we're implementing. So with emotional responses, that might look more like recognizing and acknowledging your emotions related to stress, allowing yourself to experience and process these emotions without judgment. Emotional regulation looks like developing strategies to regulate your emotions in healthy ways. This might include engaging in activities that bring you joy, practicing relaxation techniques, or seeking emotional support from loved ones. And then self-care and stress reduction, so prioritizing self-care activities that nurture your emotional well-being. This can include engaging in hobbies, practicing mindfulness or meditation, seeking professional counseling, or engaging in creative outlets. And then the last one is implementing positive coping mechanisms. So this can look like journaling, expressing gratitude, engaging in physical activity, or even listening to music. Oftentimes, what I hear from people is that they don't have enough time to practice things like mindfulness. And something that someone actually brought up during one of the sessions that we had is that they actually use washing dishes as a time for themselves to be mindful. And this looks like really being mindful of the warm water, the suds on your hands, and things like that. And so it's really important to kind of work these approaches into a way that works for you. It's important to note that both problem solving and emotional responses kind of go hand in hand, and they're not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary approaches to stress management. By combining these strategies, you can address the practical aspects of stressors while also tending to your emotional well-being. I would say experiment with different techniques and find a balance that works best for you. So there's a difference between stressors and stress reactions, and it's very important to differentiate between stressors and stress reactions. Stressors are external events, situations, or demands that may exert pressure on us, such as work deadlines, conflicts, or financial difficulties. Stress reactions are our internal responses to these stressors, involving physiological, emotional, and cognitive changes. And the reason why it's important to kind of make this differentiation is because it allows us to feel more empowered to change the way that we respond to stress. So we don't oftentimes have full control over the stressors. But what we do have more control over is how we react to stress. So by understanding this distinction, we can recognize that stressors alone do not determine our stress levels or our responses. It's actually our interpretation, thoughts, and emotional reactions that influence the impact of stressors on our well-being. And by becoming aware of this, our thoughts and emotions surrounding stressors, we can challenge negative or distorted ways of thinking, reframe situations, and cultivate healthier coping mechanisms. And this can lead to more of an adaptive stress response and improved overall well being as well. So, a useful exercise that can help to identify sources of stress is something called the stress inventory. And it might be something that you've used before, maybe not for stress, but it is a very common approach that gets used in cognitive behavioral therapy, where you get to kind of think about what your thoughts are and how your thoughts impact your feelings and how all of these things are very connected. So there will be a resource that will be provided as well that will kind of provide a stress inventory, but I'll go through a step-by-step process of how to kind of do this. So first of all, you're going to look at the inventory worksheet. Reflect on recent times. Take a few moments to yourself to really reflect on what might have caused you to feel stressed out within the last few weeks or months. Really think about areas such as work, relationships, finances, health, and even personal obligations. And then in the sources of stress area, you're going to start thinking about specific situations, circumstances that may have caused you to feel stressed or overwhelmed during that certain time period. Be as specific as possible, noting both major and minor stresses. Examples may include work deadlines, conflict with loved ones, financial pressures, health concerns, or other significant life events. And then you're going to assess the impact on you. In the impact on me column, write down how each source of stress has impacted you. Consider the emotional, physical, and mental impact of each stressor. Reflect on how it has influenced your mood, sleep patterns, energy levels, overall well-being, and any other relevant factors. And then you're going to rate your stress levels. Next to each item in the impact on me column, rate the level of stress it has caused between a 1 to 10. 1 being minimal stress and 10 being extreme stress. Review and reflect. Take a moment to review your completed stress inventory worksheet. Observe any patterns that might be reoccurring, and then which ones may have had the most significant impact and influence on your well-being. The experience of stress is very individual, and the ways in which we respond to it are also very individual and vary from person to person. It's essential to recognize and understand our own unique reactions and impacts when it comes to stress, because this knowledge actually empowers us to identify sustainable, personalized, and relevant stress management strategies. By identifying the specific ways in which stress impacts us, we can actually tailor our coping mechanisms to address our individual needs. What works for you might not work for me, and what works for me might not work for you. So it's crucial to explore and experiment with different techniques to find what resonates with us individually. Taking the time to understand our own stress responses allows us to be more proactive in managing stress. It helps us recognize early warning signs, implement effective strategies, and develop resilience as well. Personalized stress management approaches enable us to build a toolkit of techniques that truly work for us, supporting our well-being in a sustainable and meaningful way. Now, the last step of this exercise is something I want you to be mindful of when moving into the next part of this workshop. This is identifying coping strategies. After identifying the sources of stress, it will be important to note down coping strategies or solutions that might work for your individual stressors. Through conducting a stress inventory, you gain a clear understanding of the specific stressors affecting you and their impact on your well-being. This exercise can help you prioritize areas of focus, develop targeted coping strategies, and take proactive steps towards stress management, and overall well-being. So I want you to start thinking about what are some coping mechanisms that you might have used before. Some of the things that you might see in this word list: deep breathing, expressive writing, time management, seeking therapy, engaging in hobbies, meditation practices, journaling exercises, relaxation techniques. It's important to start thinking about when you've been successful as well. What are some of the exercises that you've done before in the past that have brought you good results? And give yourself praise for that, right? It's really important to celebrate your wins. It's really important to recognize the work that you're doing already to manage your stress. So what I want you to do now is to add another 2 columns to your stress log. Add the coping strategy you used, and then the effect of the coping strategy. And you might want to start thinking about using problem-solving responses and emotional responses, right? We kind of talked about it earlier, but it's important to take care of the problem, but it's also equally important to take care of your emotions as well. So I think when we start thinking about this as well, it's really important to experiment, but also not to feel like you aren't doing it right if you don't feel the effects right away. I think oftentimes it can really take time and patience to be able to effectively manage stress. When reviewing the stress inventory log, it might also better help us understand things that we're doing that are maladaptive ways of handling stress. Maladaptive ways of dealing with stress are behaviors or coping mechanisms that might provide temporary relief but ultimately harm your, physical or mental well-being. Some of those things look like avoidance and denial, emotional eating, procrastination, isolation, overworking, rumination, excessive screen time. All of these things might be maladaptive ways of handling stress. And in order to stop these maladaptive coping strategies, it's important to build healthier coping mechanisms to replace them. And sometimes that first step really is recognition that we're engaging in maladaptive ways of managing stress. It's important to not press judgment on yourself for engaging in these behaviors. It may have been your body and mind's way of handling the situation under stress. And it's the behavior that needs to change and not you at your core. Making this realization can help you recognize your own strength and ability to make change. When you start to chart and be more mindful regarding the ways you may have previously been handling stress, it may become more apparent that sometimes our coping strategies are keeping our stress levels well and alive. When we begin to recognize things that need change and find healthier things to replace our previous ways of handling stress, it can significantly reduce stress and lead to healthier lifestyle changes. Remember that things take time, and doing it one step at a time is the best way to go about things. I think practicing that self-tolerance during times of change is also going to be crucial for maintaining your mental and emotional well-being through this as well. Change can be challenging, and it might feel really awkward at first as well and bring about feelings of uncertainty, discomfort, and maybe even fear. I think some of the ways in which we can practice that self-tolerance look like self-compassion, treating yourself with kindness and understanding, acknowledging that change can be difficult and it's okay to have mixed emotions around it. I would say avoid self-criticism and negative self-talk, and practice self-compassion by speaking to yourself like you might speak to a friend who's in a similar situation as you. Mindfulness, so cultivating mindfulness to stay present in the moment and to avoid dwelling on past regrets or worrying excessively about the future. Again, step by step, day by day, and moment by moment. Mindfulness can help you accept your feelings and experiences without judgment. Setting realistic expectations, practicing patience, celebrating the small wins that we talked about as well, and visualizing a positive outcome. When we feel like we're going to fail, chances are we're not giving ourselves a chance to actually succeed. And learning from your mistakes and developing a more supportive inner dialogue. And that will happen as you continue to challenge the negative self-talk. Focusing on what you can control as well will be really crucial in managing stress, but also managing some of those feelings of change that might come up as you move through learning better strategies. So the last exercise that I'm going to introduce is called the circle of controls. And the circle of controls exercise is really useful for managing stress and focusing on aspects of life that we can control. So a step-by-step guide looks like drawing 3 circles. Again, a resource will be provided to you as well. And then identifying 3 different areas, right? So you're going to think about what are some of the worries that you have. And some of your worries you might have more control over, and some of your worries you might have least amount of control over. So reflect and prioritize. Take a moment to reflect on areas in which you've identified in different sections of the circle. Notice the difference between the concerns that are outside of your control and the aspects you can directly influence. This exercise will help you shift your focus from the things you can't control to more in the middle circle, the circle that says most control. And once you've identified that, you can actually start brainstorming actionable steps or strategies you can take to address those concerns. And it's going to be about learning how to let go of some of what you can't control. Recognize that there will always be areas of your life that are beyond your control. Practicing acceptance and focusing your energy on the things you can influence instead can reduce your amounts of stress and increase your sense of empowerment. I would say review and revisit this regularly as your circumstances change and new concerns arise, right? The circle of controls exercise highlights things that are within your control and the things that may exist outside of your control. It serves as a visual reminder to shift your attention and efforts towards what you can control. It helps promote an active way of managing stress and fosters a sense of empowerment in dealing with life's changes. For things that may not necessarily be within your control, it can be important to find coping mechanisms to handle that stress. So to kind of sum it all up, I think it's really important to allow yourself time and patience when learning how to better manage stress. This is a new experience, and it can take time for new habits to develop. Sometimes people may feel guilty or ashamed if they can't grasp coping mechanisms right away or are unable to do so. But this guilt can be counterproductive. There's no one right way of doing things. And it's personal and it's an adaptive process. It's important to remember that while self-care and time alone is very important for feeling less stressed out, individualizing and blaming ourselves for the stress experienced and solely focusing on ways in which we can manage that stress kind of forgets the fact that it's okay to rely on other people too. It's important to identify your support system and ask for help if you recognize you need it. So what I want you to kind of do now as we move to the end of our workshop is think about how might you apply what you learned, and do you understand stress and what it is and how it can affect you, and really start thinking about how you might use some of the exercises that we discussed today. So here's my email as well. I'll look forward to hearing from you if there's any sort of questions or concerns. And please also look out for that resource that will be provided as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you take care.